The first time it happened, Daniel thought he was losing his mind. He'd placed one gold coin on his nightstand before collapsing into bed, exhausted from grief and the weight of unanswered questions. When he woke, there were two identical, impossible, real. He'd found the original coin half buried at his father's grave that morning, a mysterious artifact that didn't match anything in his father's extensive collection. Warm to the touch and covered in symbols he couldn't identify. Now it had a twin, as if the universe had decided that one impossible thing wasn't enough. Daniel picked up both coins with trembling hands, their weight substantial, their warmth radiating through his palms like captured sunlight. He checked the drawer where his father's collection sat in careful rows. Everything was in its place. These two coins were something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist, something that multiplied while he slept. 3 months had passed since Thomas Mercer's funeral. 3 months of Daniel avoiding the cemetery, avoiding grief, avoiding the reality that his father was gone. And now, on the first day he'd found the courage to visit the grave, he'd discovered something that defied every law of physics and reason. The coins gleamed innocently on his palm, silent and mysterious, holding secrets he couldn't begin to fathom. By the end of the week, there would be 9. By the end of the month, over 100. And Daniel would finally understand his father's last gift, a lesson about loss, legacy, and the impossible mathematics of love. The cemetery grass was still damp from the morning rain when Daniel Mercer knelt beside his father's headstone for the first time since the funeral. 3 months had passed. 3 months of avoiding this place, out of pretending that if he didn't see the grave, didn't read the carved letters spelling out Thomas Mercer, 1957-2024, beloved father and friend, then maybe none of it was real. His fingers traced the grooves of his father's name, rough granite catching against his skin. The stone was simple, just as his father would have wanted. No elaborate angels or weeping willows, just clean lines and honest words. Daniel remembered how his father had always said that a man's legacy wasn't carved in stone, but lived in the hearts of those he'd touched. Yet here Daniel was, searching for something tangible, something he could hold on to. "I'm sorry I haven't been here," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking slightly. The words felt inadequate, hollow against the weight of his absence. "I kept meaning to come. I just couldn't." A crow cawed from a nearby oak tree, and Daniel looked up, blinking against the weak autumn sunlight filtering through the branches. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful in a way that felt almost intrusive. He'd expected this moment to feel more dramatic somehow, more final. Instead, it just felt ordinary, like a Tuesday afternoon, where everything was normal, except that his father was gone, and nothing would ever be normal again. He noticed something glinting near the base of the headstone, half buried in the earth where fresh grass was beginning to reclaim the disturbed soil. Daniel leaned closer, his heart quickening inexplicably. It looked like metal, catching the light at just the right angle. With careful fingers, he brushed away the damp soil. A coin emerged, but not just any coin. It was gold, heavy and warm in his palm when he lifted it free. Daniel turned it over, studying the unfamiliar markings etched into its surface. The symbols weren't like any currency he recognized, intricate and flowing, almost organic in their design. His father had been a numismatist in his spare time, collecting coins from his travels, spending hours cataloging and researching their origins. But Daniel had never seen anything like this in his father's collection. The weight of it, the warmth that seemed to pulse gently against his skin. It felt alive somehow, which was ridiculous. "Where did you come from?" Daniel murmured, holding the coin up to the light. As if in answer, the coin seemed to hum. Or maybe that was just his imagination, his grief-addled mind, creating meaning where there was none. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, the weight of it settling against his chest like a secret, like a promise. Daniel's apartment still smelled like his father's workshop, sawdust and metal polish, coffee and old books. He'd moved most of Thomas's things here after the estate sale, unable to let go of the pieces that mattered most. The numismatic collection sat in careful rows on newly installed shelves, each coin in its protective case, each case labeled in his father's precise handwriting. He pulled the mysterious coin from his pocket and set it on his desk, beside the reading lamp his father had given him for his college graduation. The light caught the strange symbols, making them seem to shift and dance across the golden surface. Daniel pulled out his phone and started searching, typing variations of antique gold coin unusual symbols into every search engine and collector database he could find. Nothing matched. The markings were unlike any ancient script he'd seen in his father's reference books. Greek, Latin, Arabic, Chinese, none of them resembled the flowing patterns etched into this coin. "What were you trying to tell me, Dad?" he asked the empty room. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister Claire. "Mom's asking about Thanksgiving. Are you coming this year? Please say yes. She needs us both there." Daniel stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply button. Thanksgiving had always been their father's favorite holiday, not for the food or the football, but for the gathering, the togetherness. The thought of sitting around that table with an empty chair felt impossible. "I'll think about it," he typed back, knowing it was a coward's answer. He turned his attention back to the coin, picking it up again. The warmth was still there, more pronounced now, radiating through his palm like captured sunlight. On impulse, he opened the drawer where he kept his father's magnifying glass, the good one, with the weighted brass handle, and examined the coin more closely. The symbols seemed to form a pattern, a circular design that spiraled from the center outward. At the heart of it was something that looked almost like a tree, branches reaching out to embrace the outer ring of characters. It reminded him of something his father used to say: "Family is like roots and branches. We're all connected, even when we can't see the whole tree." Daniel set the coin down carefully on the desk and rubbed his tired eyes. It was late past midnight and he had work in the morning. But sleep felt impossible when his mind was racing with questions that had no answers. When he finally crawled into bed, he left the coin on the desk, illuminated by the small reading lamp. Just before he closed his eyes, he could have sworn he saw it gleam a little brighter. As if acknowledging his attention, morning light streamed through Daniel's bedroom window, and he woke with the disoriented feeling of someone who'd slept deeply despite expecting insomnia. His dreams had been full of his father, not the sick, diminished version from the final months, but Thomas in his prime, laughing over some shared joke, his hands moving animatedly as he explained the history of some ancient coin. Daniel stretched and padded to the bathroom, his mind already on the day ahead. He had a client meeting at 10, a design proposal to finalize, and about a dozen emails to answer. Life, it seemed, continued its relentless forward march, whether you were ready or not. It wasn't until he returned to his bedroom to get dressed that he noticed something odd about his desk. There were 2 coins now. Daniel froze, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. He approached slowly, as if the coins might vanish if he moved too quickly. They sat side by side, identical in every way. The same weight, the same warmth, the same mysterious symbols etched into their golden surfaces. He picked them both up, feeling their substantial weight in his palms. They were identical, perfectly, impossibly identical. He examined them under the magnifying glass, comparing every detail. The symbols matched exactly, down to the tiniest groove and curve. Even the subtle wear patterns were the same. "This isn't possible," Daniel said aloud, his voice shaky. He checked the drawer where he kept his father's collection, wondering if somehow he'd mistaken one of those coins for something unusual. But no, everything was in its place, carefully preserved and labeled. These 2 coins were something else entirely. Daniel set them carefully on the desk and stepped back, his analytical mind trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe he'd been so tired last night that he'd somehow had 2 coins all along without realizing it. Maybe the grief was affecting his memory, creating gaps and false impressions, but he knew that wasn't true. He'd held 1 coin in his hand, just one. He was certain of it. His phone rang, making him jump. It was his business partner, Marcus. "Hey, are you on your way?" Marcus's voice was casual, familiar. The Hendersons are already here, and you know how they are about punctuality. Daniel glanced at the clock. 9:45. He was supposed to be at the office already. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, grabbing his jacket. Start without me if you need to. Show them the preliminary sketches. He hung up and looked back at the coins, gleaming innocently on his desk. After a moment's hesitation, he scooped them both up and dropped them into his pocket. He couldn't explain why, but leaving them felt wrong, like abandoning something precious. The design firm where Daniel worked occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in the Arts District, all exposed brick and industrial lighting. Normally, he loved the space, the creative energy, the constant hum of collaboration. Today, it felt surreal, like he was moving through someone else's life while his real self remained back in that apartment, staring at impossible coins. The meeting with the Hendersons went well, despite his distraction. They were renovating a historic home and wanted it to honor the building's past while embracing modern sustainability. Daniel found himself touching the coins in his pocket repeatedly during the presentation, drawing comfort from their solid presence. Your father would have loved this project, Marcus said after the clients left, nodding toward the sketches spread across the conference table. He always appreciated your eye for preserving history. Daniel managed a smile. Marcus had known Thomas well. They'd met several times at company events, and his father had always been supportive of Daniel's career change from finance to architecture and design. Thanks. I keep thinking about what he'd say about certain choices. That's not grief talking, that's good instincts, Marcus said, clapping him on the shoulder. Your dad raised you to think critically. Trust that. After Marcus left, Daniel pulled out the coins and set them on his desk, partially hidden behind his computer monitor. He tried to focus on work, on the CAD drawings that needed refining, but his eyes kept drifting back to the golden discs. Around 2 o'clock, his phone buzzed with another text from Claire. Found Dad's old recipe book, the one with his handwritten notes. Thought you might want it. Coffee tomorrow? Daniel felt a rush of emotion so intense it surprised him. That recipe book, his father had used it for decades, adding notes about temperature adjustments and ingredient substitutions, chronicling family dinners and holiday experiments. Yes, he typed back. Café Moreno at noon, perfect. Miss you, little brother. The simple words made his eyes sting. He and Claire had always been close, but in the months since their father's death, they'd orbited each other carefully, both afraid of triggering the other's grief. Daniel blinked hard and returned his attention to his computer screen. The afternoon passed in a blur of design revisions and phone calls. When he finally glanced at the clock, it was after 6, and the office was empty, except for him. He reached for the coins to put them back in his pocket, and his hand froze. There were 3 now, 3 identical golden coins, arranged in a perfect triangle on his desk. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table, the 3 coins arranged in front of him, and watched. He watched the way they caught the light, the way the symbols seemed to pulse with some inner luminescence. He watched for any sign of movement, any indication of how or why they were multiplying. At 3:47 a.m., when his eyes were burning with exhaustion and his 3rd cup of coffee had gone cold, he saw it happen. The air above the coins shimmered, like heat rising from summer pavement. There was no sound, no flash of light, just a subtle distortion in reality, and then there were 4 coins where there had been 3. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He reached out with a trembling hand and touched the new coin. It was warm, solid, real. Not an illusion, not a hallucination induced by grief and sleeplessness. Real. What are you? He whispered. The coins offered no answer, just their silent golden presence. As dawn broke over the city, painting his apartment in shades of gold and amber, Daniel made a decision. He needed help, needed someone who might understand what was happening. His father's best friend, Professor Eleanor Vasquez, was a historian who specialized in mythology and ancient cultures. If anyone could shed light on these impossible coins, it would be her. He sent her an email, trying to sound casual despite the bizarreness of his request. Professor Vasquez, I hope this finds you well. I found something unusual among my father's effects and hoped you might help identify it. Would you have time to meet this week? Her response came within an hour. Daniel, of course. I've been thinking about you and wondering how you're managing. I'm free this afternoon if that works. My office at the university, 2 p.m. Daniel spent the morning in a daze, going through the motions of his morning routine while the 4 coins sat heavy in his pocket. He met Claire at Café Moreno at noon, grateful for the normalcy of his sister's presence. Claire looked tired, he noticed, dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. She'd always been the strong one, the one who held everything together, but grief was wearing on her, too. You look terrible, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. Thanks. You too. They both laughed, the sound a little watery, and suddenly Daniel felt the weight of the past few months pressing down on him. Claire reached across the table and took his hand. We're going to be okay, she said softly. Eventually, right? Right, Daniel agreed, not entirely sure he believed it. She pulled out their father's recipe book, the cover worn soft with use, pages dog-eared and stained with decades of cooking adventures. Daniel opened it carefully, seeing his father's handwriting on every page, notes about Claire's 8th birthday cake, adjustments for Daniel's peanut allergy, a star next to the Thanksgiving turkey recipe with the annotation, perfect every time. He was so proud of you, Claire said quietly. Of both of us, but especially you, for having the courage to change careers and follow what made you happy. Daniel felt the coins in his pocket grow warmer, almost as if they were responding to the conversation. He almost told Claire about them then, almost pulled them out and shared this impossible mystery. But something held him back, the fear that speaking it aloud would make it real, would force him to confront whatever was happening. I'm trying to live up to that, he said instead. Some days are easier than others. Professor Vasquez's office was exactly as Daniel remembered, overstuffed bookshelves, artifacts from a dozen different cultures, and the comforting smell of old paper and jasmine tea. She embraced him when he arrived, holding him tight the way his father used to. I'm so glad you reached out, she said, her dark eyes warm with concern. Thomas was my dearest friend. Not a day goes by that I don't miss our debates. Daniel settled into the familiar leather chair across from her desk and pulled out the 4 coins, setting them carefully on the cleared space between them. Professor Vasquez leaned forward, her expression shifting immediately to one of intense focus. She picked up one of the coins, turning it over in her practiced hands, her eyes tracing the symbols with the kind of careful attention Daniel had seen her give to artifacts in museum collections. Where did you find these? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. In the cemetery. At my father's grave. Daniel hesitated, then decided truth was his best option. There was one at first. Now there are 4. They're multiplying, Professor. I've watched it happen. He expected skepticism, perhaps gentle concern about his mental state. Instead, Professor Vasquez set the coin down carefully and met his eyes. Your father came to see me 2 weeks before he died, she said quietly. He was searching for something, asking questions about old legends, myths about objects that carried intention and memory. I thought it was just another one of his research projects, but now, she gestured to the coins. Now I think he found something. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. What do you mean? What are these? I'm not entirely sure, but the symbols. Professor Vasquez reached for one of her reference books, flipping through pages filled with ancient scripts and mystical diagrams. They remind me of something from pre-Columbian mythology, stories of objects that held the essence of a person's intentions, their love and wisdom. They were said to multiply as a manifestation of generosity. The more you gave, the more they produced. That's impossible, Daniel said, even as he watched her trace her finger along a diagram that looked eerily similar to the pattern on his coins. Is it? Professor Vasquez smiled gently. You're sitting here with coins that reproduce themselves. What is impossible anymore? She spent the next hour showing him references, piecing together fragments of myths and legends from cultures separated by thousands of miles and years. yet all sharing the same core theme, objects of power that grew with intention, that responded to the heart of their holder. Your father believed in the power of legacy, Professor Vasquez said, as Daniel prepared to leave. Not wealth or fame, but the genuine impact we have on others. If these coins are what I think they are, they're not about the gold itself. They're about something much more valuable. Daniel left the university with more questions than answers, the 4 coins feeling heavier than ever in his pocket. As he walked through the campus, past students laughing and studying and living their lives, he felt the strange sensation of existing in 2 worlds at once. The ordinary one where people worried about exams and relationships, and this other one, where grief and magic intertwined in ways he was only beginning to understand. By the end of the week, there were 9 coins. Daniel had taken to keeping them in his father's old cigar box, the one made of cedar that still held the faint smell of tobacco and wood polish. Each morning he'd count them, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and wonder as the number increased. 9 golden coins, each identical, each warm to the touch, each carrying those mysterious symbols that Professor Vasquez believed were ancient expressions of love and generosity. Daniel's apartment had become a shrine of sorts, his father's belongings mixing with these multiplying miracles, creating a space that felt caught between past and present, grief and mystery. He'd called in sick to work twice, unable to concentrate on anything but the coins and what they might mean. Marcus had stopped by, concerned, bringing Thai food and questions Daniel couldn't answer. "You're starting to worry me," Marcus had said, studying Daniel's face with the kind of frank assessment that came from years of friendship. "I know you're grieving, and I know there's no timeline for that, but you're disappearing, man. When's the last time you ate a real meal? Slept a full night?" Daniel had wanted to tell him everything, to pull out the coins and say, "Look, my dead father left me something impossible, and I don't know what to do with it." Instead, he'd forced a smile and promised to take better care of himself, to come back to work Monday ready to focus. But now it was Saturday morning, and Daniel stood in front of the cigar box, 9 coins gleaming inside, and he felt paralyzed by indecision. Professor Vasquez's words echoed in his mind. They're about something much more valuable. His phone rang. "Claire." "Hey!" Her voice was tight, strained. "Can you come over? I need to talk to someone and Mom's not—" "I just need my brother right now." 20 minutes later, Daniel was sitting in Claire's living room, watching his sister pace back and forth, her hands moving in agitated gestures that reminded him aching. "I got offered a position in Seattle," she said finally, stopping to face him. "A good position, the kind of opportunity I've been working toward for years. But it means leaving, moving across the country, leaving Mom here alone, leaving you, leaving—" Her voice cracked. "Leaving Dad." Daniel felt the coins in his jacket pocket, their warmth a comfort against his chest. He thought about his father, about the last conversation they'd had when Thomas could still speak clearly, when the illness hadn't yet stolen his words. "What would make you happy, Claire?" he asked gently. "I don't know." She sank onto the couch beside him, exhausted. "I feel like I'm abandoning everyone, but I also feel like if I don't do this, I'll regret it forever. Dad always said to follow our hearts, but my heart is pulling me in 2 directions." Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out one of the coins. He held it out to Claire, the gold catching the afternoon light streaming through her windows. "Dad left this for me," he said, which was true in its way. "I want you to have it." Claire took the coin carefully, turning it over in her hands. "It's beautiful." "What is it?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," Daniel admitted. "But I think it's Dad's way of telling us that love doesn't diminish with distance, that we carry the people who matter with us, wherever we go." His sister closed her fingers around the coin, and Daniel saw tears streaming down her face. "You think I should take the job. I think you should do what feels right for you. And I think Dad would say the same thing." They sat together in comfortable silence, 2 siblings bound by loss and love, figuring out how to move forward while honoring what they'd left behind. That night, Daniel lay awake, thinking about what he'd done. He'd given away one of the coins without really understanding what they were or what giving them away might mean. Part of him worried he'd made a terrible mistake, dispersed something precious without fully grasping its value. But another part, the part that sounded like his father's voice in his head, felt right about it. In the morning, he opened the cigar box, expecting to find 8 coins. There were 11. Daniel stared at them, his mind reeling. They hadn't just replaced the one he'd given Claire. They'd increased by 3, as if the act of giving had somehow accelerated their multiplication. Professor Vasquez's words came back to him. The more you gave, the more they produced. He picked up his phone and called her. They're increasing faster, he said without preamble when she answered. I gave one to my sister yesterday, and this morning there are 3 more than I should have. Interesting, Professor Vasquez said, and he could hear the sound of pages turning. That aligns with the legends. The objects weren't meant to be hoarded, Daniel. They were meant to be shared, given to those who needed them. Each act of genuine generosity multiplied their power. But power to do what? Daniel asked, frustrated. They're just coins. What am I supposed to do with them? Are they just coins? Professor Vasquez asked gently. Think about how you felt when you gave one to Claire. Think about what it meant. Daniel remembered the relief on his sister's face, the way she'd held the coin like it was a talisman, a piece of their father she could carry with her to Seattle. It wasn't about the gold itself. It was about the connection, the permission to move forward without guilt. It's not about the money, he said slowly. No, Professor Vasquez agreed. It never was. Your father understood something profound about legacy. Real wealth isn't what we accumulate. It's what we give away. After they hung up, Daniel sat with the coins for a long time thinking. His father had been a middle-class teacher and part-time numismatist. There hadn't been a fortune to inherit, no trust fund or property empire. But Thomas Mercer had been rich in the ways that mattered, in friendship, in kindness, in the time he gave to students who needed extra help, in the wisdom he shared freely with anyone who asked. These coins, whatever they were an extension of that philosophy. They were his father's final lesson, delivered in the most impossible, magical way imaginable. Daniel made a decision. The Riverside Community Center was housed in a building that had seen better days, paint peeling from the walls, windows that didn't quite close properly, furniture held together with duct tape and determination. But it was filled with something precious, hope. Daniel had volunteered here briefly in college, helping with after-school programs for kids whose parents worked multiple jobs. His father had encouraged it, said that giving your time was the most valuable gift of all. He found Maria Santos in her usual spot, the director's office that was really just a converted storage closet, drowning in paperwork and looking exhausted. Daniel Mercer, she said, surprised but pleased. I heard about your father. I'm so sorry. He was a good man. He was, Daniel agreed, sitting in the wobbly chair across from her cluttered desk. Maria, I want to help. The center, the programs, what do you need most right now? Maria laughed, but there was no humor in it. What don't we need? We're about to lose our lease because we can't make rent. Half our after-school teachers quit because we couldn't afford to pay them anymore. We've got waiting lists for every program, and kids who desperately need a safe place to go after school. But we're running on fumes and wishes. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 gold coins. He set them on the desk between them. Sell these, he said. Use the money for the center. Maria picked up one of the coins, her eyes widening. Daniel, these look valuable. This is too much. It's exactly enough, Daniel said firmly. My father believed in what you do here. This is his legacy and mine. Please. He left before she could protest further, feeling lighter than he had in months. As he walked back to his car, his pocket felt empty, but in a good way, like space had been cleared for something new. When he got home, the cigar box held 14 coins. The multiplication accelerated. By Monday, there were 20 coins. By Wednesday, 37. Daniel stopped counting exactly, stopped trying to make sense of the mathematics. Instead, He started making a list of people and places that needed help. His father's former teaching assistant, now struggling to afford medical school. A family whose house had burned down, losing everything. The animal shelter that was always one emergency away from closing. The single mother in his building who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't quite make ends meet. Each giving felt like a conversation with his father, like asking, "Would this be okay?" And hearing a resounding yes in the way the coins hummed with warmth in his hands. Marcus noticed the change in him, commented that he seemed more present, more alive than he'd been in months. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," Marcus said over lunch. "You've got that light back in your eyes." Daniel smiled. "I think I'm finally figuring out what Dad was trying to teach me all along." He returned to work with renewed focus, pouring his energy into the Henderson project and designing spaces that honored the past while embracing the future. In the evenings, he researched charities and causes, places where a mysterious gold coin might transform into hope and opportunity. Professor Vasquez called him regularly, fascinated by what was unfolding. "This is unprecedented," she said during one conversation. "The legends mentioned multiplication, but never on this scale. Your father must have imbued them with extraordinary intention. Or maybe it's not just him," Daniel suggested. "Maybe it's what I'm choosing to do with them. Maybe the magic isn't in the coins themselves, but in the act of giving." "Now you're thinking like a philosopher," Professor Vasquez said warmly. "Your father would be proud, but not everything was easy." Daniel's mother called one evening, her voice heavy with concern. "Claire told me you gave her a very valuable coin," she said. "Daniel, I know you're trying to honor your father's memory, but you need to think about your own future, too. Don't give away everything you have." "I'm not, Mom," Daniel assured her. "I promise I'm taking care of myself. This is just, it's something I need to do." "You're so much like him," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Always thinking of others first. Just remember that it's okay to think of yourself, too." After they hung up, Daniel sat with her words, examining them from all angles. Was he being reckless? Impractical. But when he opened the cigar box and saw the coins, now numbering close to 60, he didn't feel worried about his future. He felt rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. Thanksgiving arrived with the inevitability of seasons changing. Daniel drove to his mother's house, the familiar route bringing a flood of memories, past holidays. His father in the passenger seat humming off-key to the radio. Claire calling from college to say she'd be late. The house smelled like turkey and sage, cinnamon and memories. His mother opened the door, and for a moment, Daniel saw the weight of widowhood in her eyes. The grief she carried with grace and determination. "You came," she said, pulling him into a hug. "Of course I came." Claire was already there, having flown in from Seattle, where she'd started her new position 2 weeks earlier. She looked happy, Daniel noted with relief. "Tired but happy." "To Tom," she said simply, "who taught us that family isn't just about being together, but about carrying each other in our hearts wherever we go." "To Dad," Daniel and Claire echoed. The meal was bittersweet, full of laughter and tears in equal measure. They told stories, some Daniel had heard 100 times, others new and precious. Claire talked about her new job, about the apartment she'd found with a view of the water. Their mother shared memories from the early days of her marriage, when Thomas was young and idealistic and convinced he could change the world one student at a time. "He did, you know," Daniel said. "Change the world. Maybe not in the grand, obvious way he thought when he was young, but in ways that mattered. All those students he helped, all the people he touched, that's legacy." His mother reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "He'd be so proud of who you've become. Both of you." Later, as they cleaned up, Daniel pulled out 2 coins, one for his mother, one for Claire's new beginning. "I want you both to have these," he said. "Not because they're valuable, though they are, but because they're Dad's way of staying with us, of reminding us that love multiplies, it doesn't divide." His mother held hers carefully, tears streaming down her face. Claire hugged him tight, whispering "thank you" against his shoulder. When Daniel returned to his apartment that night, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, but somehow more whole than he'd felt in months, The cigar box held over 100 coins. Winter settled over the city like a blanket, and Daniel settled into a new rhythm. His days were full of work, of design projects that challenged and fulfilled him. His evenings were spent researching, planning, deciding where the next coin might do the most good. He started a foundation, worked with Professor Vasquez to set up something legitimate and lasting. The Mercer Legacy Project, they called it, dedicated to supporting education, community programs, and acts of unexpected generosity. "Your father would love this," Professor Vasquez said, as they filed the paperwork. Not the bureaucracy, mind you, but the spirit of it. The coins kept multiplying, kept appearing in the cedar box no matter how many Daniel gave away. He stopped questioning it, stopped trying to understand the mechanism. Some things he'd come to realize weren't meant to be understood, just accepted, honored, and shared. Marcus became his partner in the project, helping to vet organizations and manage the logistics of giving. "This is the weirdest and most beautiful thing I've ever been part of," Marcus said one evening as they reviewed grant applications. "Your dad really did find something magical." "I think he created something magical," Daniel corrected, "by believing in it so completely that it became real." Word started to spread about the mysterious benefactor funding community projects across the city. News articles appeared, interviews were requested. Daniel declined them all, preferring to work quietly, letting the gifts speak for themselves. But there was one interview he did accept, at his father's old high school, where they wanted to establish a scholarship in Thomas Mercer's name. Standing in the classroom where his father had taught for 30 years, surrounded by students who would never know him but would benefit from his legacy, Daniel felt something shift inside him. The grief was still there, it would always be there, he understood now, but it had transformed into something else. Not forgetting, but remembering with joy instead of only sorrow. "My father used to say that teaching wasn't about filling minds with facts," Daniel told the assembled students. "It was about opening hearts to possibilities. I hope this scholarship does the same thing, opens doors, creates possibilities, helps someone discover their own potential." After the ceremony, a young girl approached him shyly. "Mr. Mercer, I just wanted to say thank you. I was going to drop out, but this scholarship means I can stay. Your dad saved my life even though he never met me." Daniel had to blink back tears. "He'd be honored to know that." "And you honor him by not giving up." Spring came slowly, then all at once. The city transformed from gray and dormant to green and alive, and Daniel felt the transformation in himself as well. The sharp edges of grief had smoothed into something more bearable, still present but no longer overwhelming. He visited his father's grave regularly now, bringing flowers and updates on the foundation. The grass had fully grown in, the headstone weathered by one winter, and the spot felt less like a wound and more like a sacred place. "We've helped 67 families so far," Daniel said, kneeling beside the stone. "Funded 3 community centers, supported 24 students, and rescued an animal shelter from closing. Professor Vasquez says you'd have a fit about the paperwork involved, but you'd love the results." The coins had stopped multiplying quite as rapidly. Daniel wondered if there was a lesson in that too, that even magic had its rhythms, its ebbs and flows. He had enough now to sustain the foundation for years. To continue the work his father had started simply by believing in the power of generosity. Claire visited more often now, comfortable in her Seattle life, but drawn back by bonds that distance couldn't weaken. She'd started her own small foundation there, inspired by Daniel's work, focusing on housing support for families in transition. "Dad's really gone viral," she joked during one visit. The two of them sitting in the cemetery on a blanket, having a picnic near their father's grave, the way they used to have picnics in the park when they were kids. Legacy as a contagion. He'd find that hilarious. He'd find this hilarious, Daniel agreed, gesturing to their unconventional picnic spot. "Remember how he used to say that death was just another part of life, nothing to be afraid of or hidden from? And we thought he was being weird and morbid," Claire said, laughing. "Turns out he was just ahead of his time. They sat in comfortable silence, eating sandwiches and watching clouds drift across the spring sky. Daniel thought about how much had changed in the year since his father's death, how much he'd changed. The coins had been a catalyst, yes, but the transformation had been his own. His choice to honor grief, not by hiding from it, but by channeling it into something meaningful. "I had the strangest dream last night," Claire said suddenly. "Dad was there in his workshop, polishing coins like he used to, and he looked up at me and smiled and said, 'See, I told you that stuff was valuable.' And I woke up laughing." Daniel felt the now familiar warmth in his pocket where he always carried at least one coin. That sounds like him, making puns from beyond the grave. "Do you ever wonder," Claire asked hesitantly, "if the coins are really... I mean, the multiplying thing, it's impossible, right? Maybe we've all been collectively hallucinating?" "Maybe," Daniel agreed. "Or maybe some things are real because we believe in them hard enough. Maybe Dad's love was so strong, his belief in generosity so complete, that he found a way to make it tangible. That's very poetic. I've been hanging out with Professor Vasquez too much." They laughed together, and Daniel felt his father's presence in that laughter, in the spring sunshine, in the growing things around them. Not gone, just transformed, like energy that never dies, only changes form. The 1-year anniversary of his father's death arrived on a Tuesday. Daniel took the day off work, surprising no one. He'd planned for this, prepared himself emotionally, but still felt the weight of it as he drove to the cemetery in the early morning light. The city was just waking up, and the cemetery was empty, except for a few early joggers using the paths that wound between the graves. Daniel parked and walked slowly to his father's headstone, carrying a small box. The stone looked different now, weathered by a full cycle of seasons, surrounded by flowers that Daniel and Claire had planted, perennials that would come back year after year, growing stronger with time. "Hey, Dad," Daniel said, settling into his usual spot on the grass. "It's been a year. A whole year, can you believe it?" He opened the box he'd brought. Inside were letters, dozens of them, testimonials from people whose lives had been touched by the Mercer Legacy Project, students who'd received scholarships, families who'd gotten help during emergencies, teachers who'd received grants for their classrooms, community centers that had been saved from closure. Daniel read them aloud, every single one, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. Not tears of sadness exactly, or not only sadness, tears of gratitude, of connection, of understanding that death hadn't ended his father's impact on the world, only changed its form. When he finished reading, he pulled out a single gold coin, the original one, he thought. Though they were all so identical, it was impossible to be sure. He held it up to the morning light, watching the symbols catch and reflect the sun. "I think I finally understand," Daniel said. "The coins aren't magic because they multiply. They're magic because they remind us that love does the same thing. The more you give away, the more you have. You tried to tell me that my whole life, but this one stays with you," he said. "A reminder that the work continues, that your legacy isn't just in what you left behind, but in what we choose to do with it." As he stood to leave, Daniel felt lighter, unburdened in a way he hadn't expected. The grief was still there. He understood now that it always would be, that loving someone deeply meant carrying their absence like a stone in your pocket. But alongside the grief was something else: purpose, connection, hope. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Coffee later. New project I want to run by you. Another from Claire, thinking about you today. Love you, big brother." One from Professor Vasquez. The foundation received another grant application, a really special one. "Call me when you can." And one from his mother. "Your father would be so proud." "I know I am. Come for dinner this week." Daniel smiled, typing quick responses as he walked back to his car. Life, demanding and beautiful and relentlessly forward-moving, called him back to the present. He would answer that call, honoring his father's memory, not by dwelling in the past, but by living fully in the present, by being generous with his time and energy and love. That evening, In his apartment, Daniel opened the cedar cigar box. Inside were exactly 12 coins, a dozen golden reminders of what mattered most. He'd given away hundreds by now, maybe thousands, but there were always more. Not infinite, he'd learned, but sufficient. Always sufficient. He picked up one of the coins, feeling its warmth, seeing his reflection distorted in its golden surface. In that reflection he saw not just himself, but his father, his sister, his mother, all the people whose lives had been touched by this strange and beautiful magic. "Thank you," he whispered to the coin, to his father, to whatever force in the universe had made this possible. "Thank you for teaching me that the greatest wealth is what we give away, and that love, real love, multiplies infinitely, even after death, even across impossible distances, even in the face of grief." The coin hummed in his hand. Warm as a heartbeat, bright as hope, heavy with the weight of legacy and love. Daniel smiled and placed it carefully back in the box, knowing that when morning came there would be more. There would always be more, not because of magic, or not only because of magic, but because he'd learned his father's final lesson, that generosity creates abundance, that giving creates wealth, and that love, when shared freely, multiplies beyond all mathematics and reason. He closed the box gently and turned off the light, feeling at peace for the first time in a year. Tomorrow he would wake up and continue the work. Tomorrow he would give more coins away, help more people, honor his father's memory by living the values Thomas Mercer had embodied so completely. But tonight he would rest, held in the embrace of family, both present and absent, surrounded by love that death couldn't diminish, only transform.